hypoglycemia determine subsequent acute death in people with type 1 diabetes, and the paper comes from Graz in Austria and Swansea in the UK.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to present some data about severe hypoglycemia and mortality in people with type 1 diabetes. Severe hypoglycemia remains still a major hurdle for achieving treatment goals in people with type 1 diabetes. As shown in the Findayan study, around 44% of men and 36% of women report a general fear of hypoglycemia. This is not without any result. So the result is there is a higher HbA1c concentration, there are more blood glucose measurements performed per day, and those people are avoiding high-fat food intake. As we know from the 30 years follow-up of the DCCD and EDIC study, if the participants had an episode of severe hypoglycemia during the DCCT, then they have an increased risk for a following episode, for a first episode of severe hypoglycemia in a conventional group with a risk ratio of 2.77 and associated with coma or seizure of 2.86. When we jump over to the intensive group, it's quite a similar result, but it's a little bit higher. So the risk ratio for severe hypoglycemia for all the episodes, in that case, is 3.18, and associated with coma or seizure, this went up to a risk ratio of 4.81. So, as a preceding episode of severe hypoglycemia was the most powerful predictor for a following episode of severe hypoglycemia, we were thinking if this might be associated with acute death in people with type 1 diabetes. So therefore, the aim of this retrospective cohort study was to assess if the number of preceding episodes of severe hypoglycemia determines subsequent acute death in people with type 1 diabetes. So we included people from Wales from the primary care data, which include 80% of the population from Wales between 2000 and 2080. We had characteristics of age, gender, diabetes characteristics, comorbidities, and admission to hospital with the cause recorded as severe hypoglycemia, and this is the definition in these data for severe hypoglycemia. Data were then stratified for hospitalization due to severe hypoglycemia without death, death or following more than 10 days, and death within 10 days following hospitalization due to severe hypoglycemia. Group differences were then analyzed via Gruscos-Wallace, Whitney, and G-score test. Additionally, we performed a Kaplan-Meier survival analysis to assess the time from last admission for severe hypoglycemia to death for 3 different groups. So for those who had no episode of severe hypoglycemia, those who had 1 episode of severe hypoglycemia, and those who had 2 or more episodes of severe hypoglycemia. And we tried to find a predictive model for death with Cox regression. So in total, we had quite a massive number with 8,626 people with median age of 32. 44% were females, 56% were males, and the HbA1c was around 8.9%. In total, during the study, we had 1,550 people who had at least 1 episode due to severe hypoglycemia. We had 801 deaths, and in those deaths, 215 people had at least 1 episode of admission due to severe hypoglycemia. 1,335 people were alive at the end of the study. 194 died after 10 days, and 21 people died within 10 days after hospitalization. Now it's getting a little bit more interesting. If you compare the preceding numbers during the study period of hypos, then those who were alive after hypoglycemic episode had a mean number of 1.8, those who died after 10 days 2.1, and those who died within days had 2.3 preceding episodes of severe hypoglycemia. Similar results when you go through the HbA1c concentrations. Those who were alive had the highest HbA1c levels. Those who died after 10 days had around an 8.9, and those who died within 10 days had an HbA1c concentration of 8.1. Again, this result was significantly different. Females had a greater occurrence of hypoglycemia, of severe hypoglycemia. However, more males died due to severe hypoglycemia. So we performed additionally 1-year Kaplan-Meier survival analysis, first of all in comparison of having at least one episode of severe hypoglycemia versus having no episode of severe hypoglycemia. And as you see here, and this is quite in line with the previous studies and with our previous finding, at the beginning there's quite a massive drop in the survival probability, and the difference is around, let me say, 4-5%, and this result is again significantly different. And I think this is even more important when you compare 3 groups having no episode of severe hypoglycemia versus having 1 versus having 2 or more episodes. Then this line is dramatically going down within 365 days. So as you see here, between the blue line and the red line are the 2 or more episodes. The red line means you have no episode of severe hypoglycemia. There's a difference around 12%, and this result was again significantly different. So when we assess the predictor for time to death via univariate analysis, then the hazard ratio for severe hypoglycemia influenced the time to death with a hazard ratio of 4.54. Additionally, we performed the multivariate analysis with a manual backward stepwise regression where we included only significant values left in the model. And as you see here, the strongest predictor, even adjusted, is severe hypoglycemia.